Hey there, I'm Devout, the host of the Mormon News Roundup, the Mormon movie reviews, and Real Talk Mormonism. Today's episode, though, we're not going to talk about any of that. I want to share something personal, my life story, at least with regards to Mormonism. I'm documenting this mostly for posterity, for my kids, for my grandkids, for any future descendants. I wish I had something like this that I could listen to from my father or even my grandfather, to hear their voice, to listen to their story. So here's mine. I was born into the covenant. That means my parents were both members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I was raised in the Sugarhouse area of Salt Lake City. I was the fourth of 5 kids, 4 boys, 1 girl. And we were a somewhat typical LDS family, going to church every single week, praying over meals, family home evenings. Life was pretty good. I even have a legendary story of the time that I was healed by Mormon prophet Spencer Kimball when I was a kid. You can check out that video right here. But as much as my childhood had its many blessings, it definitely wasn't without challenges. At the age of 8, my wonderful world came crashing down around me when my father told me that he and my mother were getting a divorce. It marked the beginning of a tumultuous time that led me down many unexpected paths. But each one of those has shaped who I've become today. Now I'm here sharing my journey with you. From the highs of Mormon missionary service to my time attending Brigham Young University, to the lows of a personal faith crisis and many struggles, to my future descendants, this one's for you. I was born in April of 1978 at the Hollywood Memorial Hospital while my family was living in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I had 3 older siblings at the time, and my younger brother would be born a couple of years later. Now here's a picture of my parents about 3 months before I was born. Of course, my mom was pregnant at the time.
What a handsome couple.
One of the strangest rules of that hospital were that the anesthesiologists were never on call there, but available only for scheduled appointments, surgeries, and deliveries such as C-sections. Therefore, my birth was a natural, unmedicated childbirth, meaning my mother had no access to anesthesia.
Thanks, Mom.
This was exceptionally hard for my mother because I weighed over 9 pounds when I was born, the largest baby in the newborn nursery. But my robust weight was fortunate because of what followed. I was definitely a healthy newborn, a good nurser, and a welcome addition to my Mormon family. Mom spent most of the next 2 months cleaning, sorting, packing, and preparing for the family to move to Salt Lake City, and of course caring for me as an infant and taking care of our family. My father was finishing his medical internship at the VA hospital in Miami. And in addition, my dad was trying to sell his antique car and my parents' Florida residence, the latter of which was not achieved until after the move. In June, my mom and I and the younger kids flew to Phoenix to visit my grandmother and great-grandmother en route to Salt Lake City. Unfortunately, I have no memories of my great-grandmother who passed away a short time later. This cute photo of me in the blue suit was taken in Phoenix, Arizona, probably at the beginning of what we would find out later would be a serious syndrome. My father and older brother drove our family belongings cross-country in a U-Haul truck. Now, when my family finally arrived all together in Salt Lake City, it was a very stressful time, especially for my mother, settling into a new house, outfitting my father's new office, hiring a new office assistant for him, helping the family's kids become adjusted to their new environments, and especially dealing with my dad's return to active symptoms of his debilitating mental and emotional illnesses and addictions. Addictions that would tear my wonderful LDS family apart. But that's the subject of another video. I couldn't resist playing some of that video. It's one of my favorites. I had generally loving parents, though we're going to find out they had their idiosyncrasies. Because my childhood got far more tumultuous after my parents' divorce. The simple reality is that my father was often absentee and my mother was occasionally overwhelmed. Again, so much goes back to that car ride in which my father told me that he and my mother were getting a divorce. I was just so very confused and sad. Soon after that announcement, my mother and the rest of us children moved into a small house in the suburbs of Salt Lake City, and I rarely saw my father for the next few years. My father didn't have any custody at all, and he never paid much child support even though he was a wealthy dentist, which made things really, really tough. Now, when I was about 11 years old, my mother remarried a faithful LDS man, and most of the family moved to Norman, Oklahoma. Of course, it almost goes without saying that we continued to go to church every Sunday with my new stepdad. Now, the thing about it is that I didn't like my stepdad at all. I didn't like my new house. And I ended up running away from home several times because my father told me that I should try to move back in with him, back in Salt Lake City. He manipulated me in many troubling ways. After all of that, I was eventually labeled as a troubled child, and I was shipped off to southern Utah to begin a strange new chapter in my life in which I was assigned to a foster family. It turns out that my new family was a wonderful LDS family. Scripture study every night, lots of prayers, family home evening every Monday night, and once again, church every Sunday. Life was definitely good. Well, sort of. It was during this time that I really came to the Lord, gained a testimony of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and started my walk on the covenant path. But no one was going to keep me away from my dad. So after about a year in southern Utah, I ran away once again. And this time my mother finally stopped calling the police on me. I began living with my dad alone in that suburb of Salt Lake City. And I kept my newfound testimony and attended church all by myself since my dad was not an active member of the church anymore. 12 years old, attending church alone. Can you at least hit the like button for that? Now, it was at this time that I started attending seminary in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This was done in the form of generally release time during the school day, in which you'd go over to a small building for religious instruction, but I also attended early morning seminary sometimes as well. My first seminary teacher was Brother Michael Best. And much like his name would imply, he was a great teacher. And he instilled a love of the scriptures, which has endured with me until today. Now, during that time in high school, my father was a deeply troubled soul. He struggled with drug addiction. He also had a disturbing relationship with alcohol. It consumed so much of his life. He had suicidal ideation. He struggled with depression. He was an absentee parent and an absolute mess. But nevertheless, I graduated from Mormon seminary and I applied to attend college at one and only one university, Brigham Young University, Provo. Luckily, I was accepted, and I attended school there right after high school, just a couple of weeks later. In a providential coincidence, my mother had divorced my stepfather and moved to Provo because he squandered all of my mother's inheritance away. So lucky for me, I was able to move back in with my mom only a block away from campus. I was still attending church every single week with my mom, drinking the Kool-Aid deep and strong. It's delicious to the taste and very desirable. Naturally, around this time, I turned in my mission papers. I went through the endowment ceremony at the Provo Temple with a friend of the family, since my father didn't have a temple recommend, and I started wearing my Mormon garments. I was called to serve in the Washington, D.C. South Mission for 2 years. I worked really hard during that time, and I baptized like 7 people. I have a ton of shorts on this channel about my Mormon mission if you just search for Mormon missionary. I'm not going to include them in this particular recounting of my life story. Within 2 weeks of returning from the mission field in power and great glory, I continued my studies at Brigham Young University in education and in music. These are really happy times, some of the best times in my entire life. I love BYU deeply. Now, on campus is actually where I also met my wife. We shared a class of BYU ROTC. We eventually married in the Mount Timpanogos Temple about a year later. During all of this time, I really had no significant doubts. I mean, I had a few small shelf items like the Book of Abraham, but nothing to be overly concerned with. We both graduated from BYU at around the same time, and I started working my tail to the bone. While according to the celestial plan, my wife stayed at home with the kids. I held jobs in education and in music, and I even worked part-time for BYU during this time. I had 4 kids under the age of 8. I eventually completed a master's degree and a terminal degree as well. Working 80 hours a week became the norm. Because I had graduated from BYU ROTC, I was also a part-time member of the military. And I taught at many different institutions during this period of time, both in higher education and in secondary education. Now, in 2010, my life really changed because I was faced with a major life decision. I was offered a new job with the state of Utah as a senior education administrator. I would finally be able to use that terminal degree. I mean, this was an exciting opportunity. It would come with a nice pay raise and additional promotion opportunities. I mean, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. But I was unsure whether I wanted to take this job because it would require us to relocate. My wife and I had a few discussions about it, and she invited me to pray about it. And here's what happened. I involuntarily laughed, which surprised her and maybe me as well. I suddenly realized that I would have absolutely no confidence that I was receiving a divine answer to this very important question. I reasoned that if there was a maximally powerful anthropomorphic magic immortal who cared about me and my family, he should care about the seminal life decision and guide me. But I realized that I had no methodology to discriminate between supposed divine communication and my own inner voice or even wishful thinking. I tried to pray, but I ultimately realized that the process was futile. No answer came, or if one did come, it was indiscernible as divine communication to me. As an aside, we did end up taking that job, and unfortunately it didn't work out, but that's not really important to this particular story. I ended up gradually losing my testimony in any God and of course the church by extension. But folks, this didn't stop me from attending church every single week, playing in the orchestra at Temple Square for years, holding down lots of different callings, and teaching at BYU for another decade or more. I was a hardcore PIMO, P-I-M-O, physically in, mentally out. Now, during this entire period of time, my wife and I rarely discussed my lack of faith because it would lead to conflicts. I continued going through these celestial motions, but my heart definitely wasn't in it. And again, I was playing with the orchestra at Temple Square all the time. I held down callings in the church, especially in the Boy Scouts, and I was working for the church. Well, specifically BYU Provo. Now, in order to maintain your ability to teach at BYU, you have to keep up on what is called an ecclesiastical endorsement. That's a set of worthiness interviews and also thought control conformity that you have to subject yourself to with a Mormon bishop. You have to swear allegiance to the church and fealty to certain church leaders. I managed to rationalize my way through most of these interviews, but I definitely wasn't being authentic to myself. I also stopped going to the temple during this time, though I continued to wear my garments. And I left the discretion of whether we would pay tithing up to my wife, and she continued to pay it faithfully. I eventually Googled leaving the Mormon church, and I found this random video of some guy telling his story. Maybe that's how you got here today. It was fascinating seeing someone tell their story about leaving the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In January of 2022, I discovered Mormon Stories and listened to many episodes. And in March of 2022, I read the CES letter for the first time. I was well aware of most of the issues inside of the CES letter, but to see them laid out in that particular manner was life-changing. I read it several times, and I also read the apologetic responses to Jeremy's questions, especially by Jim Bennett, and those responses were not at all convincing to me. I guess the biggest thing for me was, before I read the CES letter, I couldn't explain where the Book of Mormon came from. But after I read The Late War, that was really a turning point in my life. The Late War is just so similar to the Book of Mormon, yet it doesn't require some kind of a divine connection. It seemed obvious that Joseph Smith or someone just like him could write a book like The Late War or the Book of Mormon with no God necessary. I finally admitted to my wife that I just can't keep doing this anymore. Meaning that I just can't go through the motions anymore and semi-pretend at church and with our ward friends. And my pretending was really bad though. Anyone with even a shred of discernment would have been able to figure out that I was not a TBM, a true believing Mormon. I finally made the formal decision that I just couldn't go through the charade anymore. I tried to finally come out of the closet to my family and tell them that I no longer drank the Mormon Kool-Aid, but I did it in all the wrong ways and I was not effective at all. In fact, I think I did a lot of harm. And the simple reality is that most of my believing family members were not willing to speak with me on this issue in any substantial way, and that's incredibly common. With the exception of my eldest brother who left the church in the 1990s, I really felt alone during this time. Now, technically, I still haven't left the church, just to be clear. I'm still a member of record on the rolls, at least for now. I still go to church sometimes, at least to play ward ball, and I go to the church for the talent shows or sometimes for the socials or the barbecues. We even host the missionaries from time to time, and I do enjoy going to temple open houses when I can. And if someone mistakenly believes that I'm a member of the church, I don't go out of my way to correct them. Now, of course, this may sound odd to you, but I definitely miss going to church every single Sunday. So I tried to find a podcast out there that could replace the Mormon scuttle that you get every Sunday, stay up on the church news. But I simply couldn't find anything that tickled my fancy. And if you watch this video right here, you can realize why. So in April of 2022, I co-founded the Mormon News Roundup with my original co-host, Al. And since that time, we've racked up millions of views here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, X, and Facebook. If you could like and subscribe to me on those platforms, that would be really great. And folks, there is much more to come. I might end up being the king of Mormon YouTube. We'll just have to wait and see. As we're wrapping things up here, I've said many times before that if I had a pill that I could swallow to believe like I did so long ago, that the church was, quote, true, I definitely would take that pill. But folks, we don't really choose what we believe. Our minds make decisions for us based on the evidence that it processes or the lack of evidence that it encounters. People always want to talk about in these stories about how much happier they are after they left the church. But I'm not going to talk about that because that's irrelevant to the church's truth claims. And that's all that really matters in my mind. I've had many serious bumps along the road after quote unquote leaving the church, which unfortunately is going to be the subject of another video. The final question I have before I let you go is whether I should retain my church membership. Let me know in the comments below what you think I should do. I sincerely want to hear from you. Or feel free to drop me an email to kolob@mormonnewsroundup.org. But before you go, can you hit the thumbs up, turn on notifications, and leave me a comment? That would help me out a great deal. And finally, if you really enjoy this story that you heard, you can join the Mormon News Roundup through our membership here on YouTube, or you can visit me over on my Patreon site. I'd be very grateful for a donation. Always think celestial, and remember, no unhallowed hand can stop the Mormon News Roundup from progressing.
Yo, what's up with the plunky piano? Give me a track. Yeah, that's it. That's a funky Paul Medina track. Take it, Will. I was born in the church just like my daddy was. Yo, I'm pioneer stock. My grandpa crossed the plains in the snow. I got my Eagle Scout at 12 with some assistance from my mom. I was home before 9:30 when I went to the prom. I love to sit in my pew and praise the Lord with a hymn. Amen. I'm hyperactive, yo. I even got the keys to the gym. I'm the diddly-whack Mac Mormon daddy. Yo, my peeps all be conforming cause it's cool to be a Mormon. I'm the blackjack saint on a crack daddy, oh. I'm the diddly-whack Mac Mormon daddy, and I'm spiritual.